I live in a city that never sleeps, in an apartment that's just a little too small for my book collection but perfect for me. For the past 6 years, my life has been a blur of deadlines, caffeine, and the relentless pursuit of excellence as the lead marketing strategist for a tech giant called Innovate Dynamics. It was a world I thrived in, a world I helped build, until the day the man at the top decided my ambition was a threat he needed to neutralize. This is the story of how a single, dismissive phrase, "It's just a small meeting," became the catalyst for the most calculated professional takedown of my career. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The scent of ambition in the Innovate Dynamics office was as potent as the overpriced coffee brewing in the communal kitchen. It was a fragrance I had grown accustomed to, even fond of. It smelled like late nights, color-coded spreadsheets, and the satisfying click of a campaign going live. As the lead marketing strategist, I wasn't just a part of this ecosystem, I was one of its chief architects. I had joined the company when it was a fledgling startup with more dreams than funding, and I had poured my soul into making it the industry leader it was today. My campaigns had won awards, my strategies had doubled our market share, and my name was synonymous with results. My immediate world was the marketing department, a vibrant, chaotic space filled with bright young minds. Among them was Sophia, a junior marketing associate who had joined us about a year ago. She was sharp, eager, and had an almost unnerving ability to mirror the opinions of whoever held power in the room. I'd taken her under my wing, mentoring her, sharing insights, and giving her opportunities to shine. I believed in lifting others as you climb, a philosophy that, in retrospect, was dangerously naive in a corporate environment. The man at the very top of this ladder was Richard Sterling, our CEO. Richard was a charismatic titan of the industry, the kind of leader whose speeches could make you want to run through a brick wall for the company. He had a brilliant mind for business, but it was a mind that operated within a very traditional, very masculine framework. He saw me as his star player, his marketing guru, as he often called me in board meetings. He praised my work, celebrated my successes, but there was always a subtle, unspoken barrier. It was a glass ceiling so clear I could almost forget it was there, until I pressed against it. The pressure point was Project Chimera. This was my magnum opus, a revolutionary marketing initiative I had been developing for over a year. It was a multi-platform, AI-driven campaign designed to personalize customer engagement on a scale never seen before. It was complex, audacious, and I knew it would redefine not just our company's future, but the industry standard. I had presented the initial framework to Richard months ago, and he'd been ecstatic, greenlighting a substantial budget and giving me full autonomy. The final presentation to the board of directors was scheduled in 3 weeks, a meeting that was meant to be my coronation, the moment my career trajectory would launch into the stratosphere. I was gunning for the vacant Chief Marketing Officer, CMO, position, and Chimera was my undeniable claim to it. I lived and breathed Project Chimera. My team and I worked around the clock, fueled by pizza and the thrill of creation. David Chen, a senior data analyst and one of the few people in the company I considered a true friend, was my right-hand man on the technical side. He was a quiet genius, a man who could make data sing. Together, we built the backbone of Chimera, ensuring every algorithm was flawless, every projection airtight. "This is more than just a campaign, Olivia," David had said one late night, staring at a screen of cascading code. "This is a paradigm shift. After this, they can't possibly deny you the CMO spot." I had allowed myself to believe him. The CMO position had been empty for 6 months, and Richard had repeatedly hinted it was mine to lose. "Just knock Chimera out of the park, Olivia," he'd say with a paternalistic pat on the shoulder. "The rest will fall into place." The first sign of trouble was subtle. A week before the big presentation, Richard called me into his expansive corner office, the one with the panoramic view of the city I had helped conquer. He was standing by the window, his back to me, a silhouette of power. "Olivia," he began, without turning around. "Fantastic work on Chimera. Truly groundbreaking. Thank you, Richard. The team has been incredible. He finally turned, a practiced smile on his face. Listen, I've been thinking. The board can be old-fashioned. A project this technically dense might be a bit much for them to digest all at once. I think it would be better if I introduced the core concepts to them first, in a more digestible format. A cold knot formed in my stomach. You mean you want to present it? Just the overview, he said smoothly, waving a dismissive hand. A pre-meeting, if you will. To prime them. I'll be meeting with a few key board members tomorrow morning. It's just a small meeting, nothing formal. You don't need to worry about it. You just keep perfecting the main presentation. With all due respect, Richard, I countered, keeping my voice steady, no one knows this project better than I do. I can handle the board. I can simplify it for them. I have no doubt you can, he said, his smile tightening. But this is about strategy, Olivia. It's about managing expectations. Let me handle the politics. Your job is to be the genius behind the curtain. And you're brilliant at it. The phrase genius behind the curtain hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It was a compliment wrapped in an insult, a gilded cage. He wanted my work, but not my face. He wanted my brilliance, but not my authority. I was the engine, but he would be the one in the driver's seat. I argued, as much as one can argue with a CEO who has already made up his mind. I laid out logical reasons why I should be in that small meeting. I insisted that my presence was crucial to answer any in-depth technical questions. But he was immovable. It's handled, Olivia, he said, his tone final. I need you focused on the final presentation. Don't get distracted by this. It's just a formality. I walked out of his office feeling a profound sense of unease. It felt like I had just been expertly sidelined, my own creation gently lifted from my hands. I told myself I was overthinking it, that maybe this was how things worked at the executive level. I tried to trust him. Richard had been a mentor, a champion of my work. Why would he undermine me now, when we were on the brink of our greatest success? That evening, I confided in David over a beer at our usual spot. He called it a small meeting? David asked, frowning. And he explicitly told you not to come? He said he was priming them. Handling the politics. David swirled the beer in his glass, his brow furrowed in thought. I don't like it, Olivia. That's your project. Your name should be the only one attached to it from start to finish. His words echoed my own fears, fears I had been trying to suppress with logic and loyalty. His words echoed my own fears, fears I had been trying to suppress with logic and loyalty. The glass ceiling I had ignored for so long was no longer invisible. I could feel its cold, hard surface pressing down, and I was beginning to suspect that Richard Sterling had no intention of ever letting me break through it. He was happy for me to build the ladder, but he would be the one to climb it. The day of the small meeting was one of the longest of my life. I sat at my desk, staring at the polished, intricate slides of my chimera presentation, feeling a sense of powerless dread. I had emailed Richard the executive summary and a simplified deck the night before, as requested. Perfect, he had replied in a one-word email at 2 a.m. Now, my work was being presented in a room I wasn't allowed to enter, its fate decided by men who would likely never know my name. To distract myself, I dove into work, fine-tuning the very presentation I was beginning to fear I would never get to deliver. Sophia buzzed around my desk all morning, offering coffee, asking questions, her usual eager-to-please self. Are you nervous about the board meeting? She asked, her eyes wide with what I then mistook for innocent curiosity. The big one is still a few weeks away, I replied, forcing a smile. Just getting ahead of the game. I heard Mr. Sterling is giving some of the board members a little preview today, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He must really trust you to let you handle such a huge project. He does, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. We have a great working relationship. The small meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. At 11:30 a.m., an email landed in every employee's inbox. The sender was Richard Sterling. The subject line, a new era of innovation at Innovate Dynamics. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. It was a company-wide announcement, glowing with corporate enthusiasm. It spoke of a bold new direction, a groundbreaking initiative that would secure our legacy as industry pioneers. It spoke of Project Chimera. And then, I saw the line that made the world tilt on its axis. I am proud to announce that this revolutionary initiative, which I have been developing for the past year, was met with unanimous and enthusiastic approval from our key board members this morning. Which I have been developing. The words blurred. I read them again, and then a third time, convinced my eyes were deceiving me. There was no mention of me. No credit to my team. No acknowledgement of the thousands of hours I had poured into this. Richard Sterling had just erased me from my own success story. He hadn't just presented my work, he had claimed it as his own. A wave of nausea washed over me. The open plan office, usually a hum of productive energy, suddenly felt claustrophobic. I could feel dozens of eyes on me. People were whispering, looking from their screens to me and back again. They all knew Chimera was my project. They had seen me bleed for it. And they had all just read the CEO's email. Sophia appeared at my desk, her face a mask of practiced sympathy. Oh my God, Olivia. I just saw the email. I can't believe it. He didn't even mention you. I need some air, I mumbled, pushing back from my desk and walking numbly towards the exit. I found myself on a small balcony on the 34th floor, the wind whipping at my hair. The city sprawled beneath me, a concrete jungle governed by predators and prey. And I had just been devoured. The betrayal was so audacious, so complete, it was almost surreal. It wasn't just about the credit, it was about the erasure. He had made me invisible. The small meeting wasn't a formality, it was a coup. When I returned to my desk, the final nail in the coffin was waiting. It was a calendar invitation for the official board meeting in 3 weeks. The title was Project Chimera, a presentation by CEO Richard Sterling. My name was nowhere on it. I was listed as an optional attendee. Optional. For the presentation of my own life's work. Later that afternoon, Richard walked past my desk. He didn't stop, but he slowed down just enough to catch my eye. He gave me a small, tight smile and a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of his victory. There was no remorse in his eyes, only the cold, hard glint of triumph. He had what he wanted. He had my project, my glory, and the clear path to a massive year-end bonus. I was just collateral damage. The rest of the day was a blur of feigned composure. I answered emails, delegated tasks, and pretended that my world hadn't just been shattered. I could feel the pitying glances from my colleagues, the hushed conversations that stopped when I walked by. My authority, once absolute in my department, had been crippled in a single morning. The only person who looked me straight in the eye was David. He came to my desk at 5 o'clock, his expression grim. I saw the email, he said, his voice low. And the new calendar invite. This is. I have no words, Olivia. He stole it, David, I whispered, the reality of it finally sinking in. He just took it. What are you going to do? What can I do? I said, my voice cracking. Go to HR? Complain that the CEO stole my idea? He holds all the cards. It's my word against his. And his word is on the company letterhead. I went home that night and for the first time in my professional life, I cried. I cried for my project, for my team, for the years of trust one had blindly placed in a man who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. The betrayal was a physical ache, a deep, hollow wound in my chest. But as the tears subsided, something else began to bubble up from that hollow space. It was a cold, quiet, and utterly ferocious anger. Richard Sterling had made a critical miscalculation. He thought that by erasing my name, he had erased my power. He thought I was just a genius behind the curtain, a compliant worker bee who would accept her fate and quietly move on. He had forgotten who I was. I was the architect. I had built Chimera from the ground up. I knew its every strength, every weakness, every line of code, every secret. He may have stolen the presentation, but he didn't understand the weapon he was now holding. And I was about to teach him just how badly it could backfire. The game wasn't over. He had just made his first move. Now, it was my turn. The days following the announcement were a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. Richard Sterling was now the public face of Project Chimera. He conducted interviews with tech journals, held internal town halls, and basked in the glow of my stolen brilliance. To add insult to injury, he would often consult me on the project, pulling me into meetings to pick my brain for details he didn't understand, all under the guise of keeping his star player in the loop. He was performing the role of a magnanimous leader, while simultaneously reminding me of my new, diminished place in his narrative. Sophia, meanwhile, had undergone a startling transformation. She was no longer my mentor, she was Richard's new prodigy. She was always by his side, taking notes, laughing at his jokes, and looking at him with a sycophantic adoration that turned my stomach. She was now the one briefing him on the marketing metrics, using the very frameworks and templates I had taught her. She had seamlessly stepped into the space he had carved out by pushing me aside. The betrayal from Richard was a stab in the back, the one from Sophia was the slow, deliberate twisting of the knife. My colleagues were divided. Some offered quiet, sympathetic glances in the hallway. Others, seeing the new political landscape, shifted their allegiance to Richard and Sophia, eager to align with the new center of power. I was isolated, a ghost haunting the department I had built. But I wasn't idle. My grief had crystallized into a cold, methodical resolve. I knew I couldn't fight him head-on. A public accusation would be career suicide. He was the CEO, I was a disposable employee. I needed proof. I needed leverage. I needed something undeniable, something that would expose him so thoroughly he could never recover. My quest for evidence began with David. As a senior data analyst, he had access to the digital arteries of the company, the servers, the email logs, the access records. He was my only true ally, and I knew I was asking him to risk his career. We met in a noisy coffee shop far from the office, our conversation a low murmur against the backdrop of grinding espresso machines. "I need your help, David," I said, getting straight to the point. "I need to find a digital footprint. Something that proves Chimera was mine." David took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes thoughtful. "What are you thinking? Your work logs? Your project files? They all have your name on them, but he could argue you were working under his direction. He's the CEO, technically, everything is his." "I know," I said, frustrated. "It's not enough. I need something more. Something that shows his intent to deceive." A smoking gun. A smoking gun in a corporate server is a very, very dangerous thing to look for, Olivia. If IT finds out I'm running unauthorized queries. "I know what I'm asking," I interrupted gently. "And I'll understand if you say no. But I have to do this. I can't let him get away with it." David was quiet for a long moment, staring into his cup. He had always been a man of quiet integrity, someone who believed in fairness and order. What Richard had done offended his sense of justice as much as it had shattered my career. "Okay," he said finally, meeting my gaze. "I'm in. But we have to be smart. We have to be invisible." Our investigation became a clandestine operation, conducted in stolen moments and after-hours secrecy. David's domain was the server room, a cold, humming sanctuary of data located in the sub-basement of our office building. It was a place few people had access to, a place where the company's secrets were stored in terabytes of raw information. Our first breakthrough came from the email server logs. David, using his system administrator privileges, began to meticulously trace Richard's digital communications. We found that in the weeks leading up to his announcement, Richard had exchanged a series of emails with a man named Julian Croft, a prominent member of the board of directors and a close personal friend. The emails themselves were encrypted, but the subject lines and timestamps told a story. They were all variations of Project C update and Chimera strategy, and they had all been sent late at night, long after I had gone home. He had been back-channeling my work to his allies on the board for weeks, positioning it as his own long before the small meeting. He was building his narrative in secret, David whispered, as we huddled over his laptop in the server room, the hum of the machines a constant drone around us. Laying the groundwork to cut you out. It was damning, but it was still circumstantial. We needed more. The next clue came from a place I never expected, Sophia. I had noticed her using a new laptop, a top-of-the-line model that was usually reserved for senior executives. On a hunch, I asked David to check the IT asset logs. What he found made my blood run cold. Sophia's new laptop had been issued to her 2 days before Richard's announcement. The request had been personally signed off by Richard. But the most revealing detail was the hard drive. It was a clone. The IT log showed that her old hard drive had been completely wiped, and a new image had been installed. The image was an exact copy of a drive belonging to another user, which was highly unusual. The original user whose drive was cloned? Richard Sterling. Why would he give her a clone of his own hard drive? I wondered aloud. Maybe he wanted her to have access to his files, his templates. David mused, typing furiously. But a full clone? That's overkill. And wiping her old drive is like erasing history. What was on it that they didn't want anyone to see? The answer came a few days later. David managed to access the server's shadow copies, backup snapshots of the system taken at regular intervals. He found a snapshot of Sophia's old drive from the day before it was wiped. And on it, we found a folder. It was labeled OC Edits. OC, Bolivia's Chimera. Inside the folder was a treasure trove of damning evidence. There were dozens of versions of my Chimera presentation. The earliest versions were identical to mine. But as we clicked through the files, we saw a systematic process of erasure. My name on the title slide was replaced with Richard's. My biographical slide was deleted. My speaking notes were subtly rephrased to sound like him. Sophia had been tasked with scrubbing me from my own work. She hadn't just been a passive beneficiary of Richard's theft, she had been his active accomplice. She was the one who had meticulously altered the documents, creating the version Richard would present as his own. But the real smoking gun was a single audio file, buried deep within the folder. It was named meeting_prep_rs_sv.m4. RS. Richard Sterling. SV. Sophia Vance. My hand trembled as I double-clicked the file. Richard's voice filled the small server room, smooth and confident. Okay, let's run through it again. Slide 23, the one with the predictive analytics. Olivia's notes are a bit technical. My version needs to be more visionary. Then, Sophia's voice, eager and sycophantic. Of course, Mr. Sterling. I've drafted some new talking points. Instead of algorithm-driven microsegmentation, we can say harnessing the power of predictive intelligence to create bespoke customer journeys. It sounds more powerful. Excellent, Sophia. Excellent, Richard's voice purred. You have a real talent for this. You remind me of myself when I was your age. Having the smoking gun was one thing, knowing how to fire it was another entirely. Releasing the audio file indiscriminately could backfire. It could be dismissed as a doctored recording, or I could be sued for corporate espionage. Richard was the CEO, and the company's legal machine would be at his disposal to crush me. I couldn't just expose the truth. I had to create a scenario where the truth would be undeniable and the fallout would be catastrophic for him, not for me. I needed to connect the digital dots in a way that would lead everyone, the board, the employees, the public, to the same inescapable conclusion. My mind, trained for years to think in terms of multi-layered marketing campaigns, started to build a different kind of strategy. My target audience wasn't customers, it was the board of directors. My product wasn't a tech innovation, it was Richard's treachery. My call to action wasn't a purchase, it was his termination. The first step was to understand the battlefield. I spent a week obsessively researching every member of the Innovate Dynamics board. I read their bios, their interviews, their social media profiles. I identified the key players: Julian Croft, Richard's crony, Eleanor Vance, a formidable and respected tech veteran who valued integrity above all else, and Marcus Thorne, a numbers-driven investor who cared only about the bottom line and brand reputation. Eleanor and Marcus were my targets. If I could convince them, the rest of the board would follow. The next step was to create a catalyst, an event that would force them to pay attention. The upcoming official board meeting, where Richard was scheduled to present his Project Chimera, was the perfect stage. But I couldn't just stand up and object. I had to plant the seeds of doubt beforehand, subtly and strategically. My plan began to take shape, a digital Trojan horse disguised as a routine data report. As the lead strategist, I was still responsible for providing the board with performance metrics and market analysis ahead of major presentations. It was a standard procedure, a dry, data-heavy report that Richard and the board would expect. And that was the beauty of it. He would never see it coming. I enlisted David's help once more. "I need you to build me a custom data portal," I explained, spreading out a flowchart on his desk after hours. On the surface, it will be the standard pre-meeting analytics dashboard. But I want it to have hidden layers, accessible only through specific click-throughs. David's eyes lit up as he understood my vision. Like an Easter egg hunt for corporate fraud. "Exactly," I said. "We'll embed the evidence within the data. We won't make accusations, we'll just present the facts and let them connect the dots themselves." For the next week, we worked in secret, building the most elaborate data report of our lives. The surface level was perfect. It showed market trends, competitor analysis, and projected ROI for Project Chimera, all the standard metrics. It was professional, polished, and utterly boring. But hidden within was our trap. For instance, on the slide detailing the project's timeline, the words "initial conception" were a hyperlink. If a user clicked on it, it wouldn't lead to a project brief. Instead, it would open a secure, time-stamped log of the Chimera project folder on the company server. The log would show that 98% of the core concept documents were created and last modified by Olivia Reed. Richard Sterling's name would appear only on superficial edits made in the last few weeks. On the slide about team allocation, I included a small, innocuous pie chart labeled Project Hours by Contributor. It would show my name next to a bar representing over 2,000 hours of work. Richard's bar would be a tiny sliver, representing less than 20 hours. Clicking on that sliver wouldn't open his work log. It would trigger a pop-up window displaying the IT asset log, showing the exact date and time Sophia's hard drive was wiped and cloned from Richard's. The final piece, the kill shot, was the audio file. I embedded it in the most mundane place I could think of, the appendix, in the fine print at the bottom of the last page. Next to the standard legal disclaimer, I added a sentence: "For a full audio transcript of the final project review, click here." The hyperlink was disguised as a standard corporate compliance link. But clicking it would open a password-protected media player. The password was the final, elegant touch. David had done some digging and discovered that Richard was a man of habit. The license plate on his Porsche, his first pet's name, and his secure password for several external accounts were all the same: Visionary 72. It was a stroke of ego-driven carelessness that would be his undoing. The day before the board meeting, I sent the pre-reading package to all board members and senior executives, with Richard CC'd. The email was bland and professional. Team, please find attached the preparatory data pack for tomorrow's Project Chimera presentation. The dashboard can be accessed via the secure link below. Looking forward to a productive session. I hit send, my heart pounding. The trap was set. Now, I had to wait and see if anyone would spring it. My primary hope was Eleanor Vance. Her online persona was that of a meticulous, detail-oriented leader who prided herself on due diligence. I was betting she would be the one to click through the layers, to follow the breadcrumbs I had left for her. That night, David had set up a tracker on the secure portal. We watched from his apartment as the access logs lit up. One by one, the board members logged in. Most spent a few minutes skimming the surface-level data and logged out. Richard himself logged in for precisely 90 seconds, clearly not bothering to look beyond the executive summary. Then, at 10:47 p.m., a new login appeared. Eleanor Vance. And she wasn't skimming. The log showed her clicking on the first hyperlink, the project timeline. She stayed on that page for 10 minutes. Then she moved to the team allocation chart. She clicked on Richard's sliver of a bar and accessed the IT log. The tracker showed her screen was active on that page for a full 15 minutes. My breath caught in my throat. She was connecting the dots. Finally, the tracker showed she had navigated to the appendix. There was a pause. And then, a click on the audio transcript link. The password prompt appeared on her end. We waited. For a full minute, there was no activity. I imagined her, sitting in her home office, wondering if she should cross this line. And then, the log pinged. Password accepted. She's in, David whispered, his voice filled with awe. She's listening. We watched the media player log. She didn't just listen to a snippet. She played the entire 30-minute recording from start to finish. When it was over, she didn't log out. The tracker showed her screen remained active on the media player page for another hour, the damning conversation presumably paused on her screen. She was thinking. She was processing. She was understanding. The digital dots had been connected. The story was no longer just my word against the CEO's. It was a verifiable trail of data, of logs, of his own voice, condemning him. The board meeting was in less than 12 hours. Richard Sterling would be walking into that room believing it was his coronation. He had no idea he was walking into an ambush I had spent weeks meticulously planning. And the guest of honor was the truth. The morning of the board meeting, the air in the executive suite was thick with a tense, electric anticipation. Richard Sterling was in his element, striding through the halls with the easy confidence of a king in his court. He was impeccably dressed, his smile radiating a success he hadn't earned. He saw me by the coffee machine and had the audacity to wink at me. "Big day, Olivia," he said, his voice booming. "The day our hard work pays off." The word "our" was a deliberate twist of the knife, a final assertion of his stolen ownership. I gave him a tight, unreadable smile. "Big day, Richard. I'm sure it will be very illuminating." My own role in this meeting was, on paper, minimal. I was there to run the presentation slides from my laptop, which was connected to the main screen, and to be on hand for any deeply technical questions, a role Richard had condescendingly assigned to me. It was a position of subservience, but it was also a position of immense power. The presentation wasn't just on my laptop, it was my laptop. And it contained one final, devastating surprise. I had named the presentation file chimera_board_presentation_final.pptx. It was the version Richard and Sophia had so carefully crafted, the one that erased me from history. But the night before, David and I had created a second file, hidden in the same folder. We named it chimera_board_presentation_final_v2.pptx. The only difference was the v2, a designation so common in corporate file management that it was effectively invisible. This second version was identical to the first in every way but one. The final slide, the one meant to be a triumphant summary of the project's projected success, had been replaced. I arrived in the boardroom early, setting up my laptop and ensuring the connection to the projector was seamless. Board members filed in, a collection of powerful men and women in sharp suits. I recognized Julian Croft, who greeted Richard with a familiar slap on the back, and Marcus Thorne, whose eyes were glued to his phone, tracking the stock market. Then, Eleanor Vance walked in. Our eyes met for a brief second across the room. Her expression was cold, impassive, giving nothing away. But I knew she had heard the recording. She knew the truth. The question was, what would she do with it? The meeting began. Richard took the stage, a master showman playing his greatest role. He spoke of his vision, his tireless efforts, and the long nights spent wrestling with this complex concept. I sat at the control desk, my face a neutral mask, clicking through the slides as he spoke. Each slide was a lie, a carefully constructed piece of a fraudulent narrative. I could feel Sophia, sitting near the front, beaming with pride. I could feel the weight of Eleanor's stare from across the table. Richard was brilliant, I had to give him that. He delivered my words with a passion and conviction that almost made them sound like his own. He was nearing the end of his presentation, building to his grand finale. And so, he declared, his voice resonating with manufactured triumph, with this project, we are not just looking at the next quarter. We are looking at the next decade. We are building the future of customer engagement. He nodded to me, the signal to advance to the final slide. Let's look at the summary of what Project Chimera will achieve. This was the moment. With a steady hand, I ignored the file he thought I was using. Instead of clicking next, my fingers flew across the keyboard, closing the current presentation and, in less than a second, opening the _V2 version. I navigated to the final slide and projected it onto the massive screen behind him. Richard turned to the screen, a broad smile on his face, ready to deliver his closing remarks. But the smile froze, then collapsed. The room, which had been filled with polite murmurs of approval, fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The slide was not a summary of projected ROI. It was a stark white screen with two things on it. At the top, in large, bold letters, was the question, who is the true architect of Project Chimera? Below it was an embedded media player, the one from the data portal, queued up and ready to play. The file name was clearly visible, meeting_prep_rs_sv.m4a. Richard stared at the screen, his face draining of all color. He looked as though he had seen a ghost. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked down at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and dawning, horrified realization. What is this? Julian Croft demanded, his voice sharp. What's going on? Before Richard could formulate a response, Eleanor Vance spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a razor. I believe I can answer that, she said, her gaze fixed on Richard. Last night, I did a thorough review of the pre-reading materials. And I uncovered some discrepancies. Deeply troubling discrepancies. I think we should all listen to that audio file. Her eyes flickered to me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her expression, respect. She looked back at the screen. Olivia, please play the recording. With a single, satisfying click, I hit the play button. Richard's voice, smooth and conspiratorial, filled the silent, opulent boardroom. Okay, let's run through it again. Slide 23, the one with the predictive analytics. Olivia's notes are a bit technical. My version needs to be more visionary. Then came Sophia's eager reply. A collective gasp went through the room. I looked at Sophia. Her face was a mess of pure, unadulterated panic. She looked like a cornered animal. The recording played on, every word a nail in Richard's corporate coffin. The board members listened, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock, and finally, to cold, hard fury. Marcus Thorne, the man who cared only for the bottom line, looked at Richard with utter contempt. He understood the monumental risk to the brand's reputation this represented. Julian Croft, Richard's ally, was slumped in his chair, his face ashen. When the 30-minute recording finally ended, the silence that returned was heavier, more damning than before. Richard stood frozen, a statue of a disgraced king, exposed in front of his entire court. All eyes were on him. Eleanor Vance stood up, her presence commanding the room. "Richard," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "The board has a zero-tolerance policy for fraud and intellectual property theft. You have deliberately misled this board and stolen the work of a dedicated and brilliant employee. I believe your position as CEO is no longer tenable." She turned to the rest of the board. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence and the immediate termination of Richard Sterling's employment for gross misconduct." The Trojan file had not just been opened, it had unleashed an army that had raised an empire in the space of half an hour. The war was over. And I had won. The immediate aftermath of the audio file was chaotic. Richard Sterling, who had stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, finally snapped into motion. He stammered, he denied, he accused me of fabricating the evidence. But his protests were weak, drowned out by the damning clarity of his own voice. The board was having none of it. "This is an outrage. A technical glitch," he blustered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She has manipulated the files. This is corporate sabotage." Eleanor Vance cut him off with a slice of her hand. "The file you are referring to, Mr. Sterling, was accessed through a link in a data report sent from your own company's servers. A report which also contained server logs and IT records that corroborate a timeline of deceit. Are you suggesting your entire IT department is in on this sabotage?" The color drained from Richard's face as he realized the depth of the trap. He had been so focused on the presentation, so blinded by his own arrogance, that he had never even considered the possibility that the evidence was hidden in the boring, procedural documents he'd ignored. Marcus Thorne, the pragmatist, spoke up next, his voice dripping with icy disdain. "The how is irrelevant at this point, Eleanor. What matters is the what. What we have here is a clear-cut case of executive misconduct. The potential for brand damage and shareholder lawsuits is astronomical. We need to contain this, immediately." The vote was a mere formality. One by one, the board members raised their hands in favor of Eleanor's motion. Even Julian Croft, Richard's friend, reluctantly joined the majority, seeing the futility of defending the indefensible. Richard Sterling was unanimously voted out. He was instructed to gather his personal belongings from his office, escorted by security, and vacate the premises immediately. His access cards were deactivated before he even reached the door. The swift, brutal efficiency of corporate justice was a terrifying and beautiful thing to behold. As security guards flanked a pale, trembling Richard out of the boardroom, his eyes met mine one last time. They held no triumph, no charisma, only a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He knew. He knew I had been the one to orchestrate his downfall. I held his gaze, my expression calm and unyielding, until the door clicked shut behind him. Then, there was Sophia. During the vote, she had seemed to shrink into her chair, her face white with terror. Now, with Richard gone, all eyes turned to her. Eleanor Vance's gaze was withering. "Ms. Vance. Your name was also on that recording. Your complicity is not in question. You have 10 minutes to clear out your desk." Sophia burst into tears, a pathetic, hiccuping sound that garnered no sympathy. She tried to apologize, to explain, but the board had already moved on. She was a minor casualty, a footnote in the downfall of a king. She scurried out of the room, her promising career at Innovate Dynamics over before it had truly begun. The room was quiet for a moment, the board members processing the sheer velocity of the morning's events. Then, Eleanor Vance turned her attention to me. I stood by my laptop, my heart still racing, but my hands steady. "Ms. Reed," she said, her tone formal but her eyes holding a new light of respect. "Please, have a seat." I took a seat at the massive mahogany table, the same table where just moments before, I had been an invisible functionary. Now, I was the center of attention. "You have done this company a great service today," Eleanor began. "You have exposed a rot at the very top. That took considerable courage. And even more considerable skill." She gestured towards the screen. "That was one of the most elegant corporate takedowns I have ever witnessed." Marcus Thorne grunted in agreement. She protected the company's most valuable new asset, Project Chimera, from a charlatan who would have inevitably run it into the ground. "Her actions haven't just delivered justice, they've protected our investment." Eleanor nodded. "The board is in unanimous agreement. First, we will be launching a full internal investigation, but our priority now is stability and leadership. The position of Chief Marketing Officer has been vacant for too long. And frankly, I can't think of anyone more qualified or more deserving to fill it than the person who actually invented our company's future." She smiled at me, a genuine, powerful smile. "The board would like to offer you the position of CMO, effective immediately. Along with a salary and stock option package that reflects your true value to this company. We will also, of course, be awarding you a substantial bonus as compensation for the intellectual property theft and damages you have endured." The offer hung in the air, rich with victory and vindication. It was everything I had been fighting for, everything Richard had tried to steal from me. It was the key to the executive suite, the shattering of the glass ceiling. I took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. I thought about the late nights, the stolen credit, the cold fury that had fueled me for weeks. I had not just won, I had rewritten the rules of the game. "Thank you, Ms. Vance," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I am honored. I accept." My gambit in the boardroom had paid off beyond my wildest dreams. I hadn't just gotten my project back. I had taken the entire kingdom. As I walked out of that room, I wasn't Olivia Reed, the sidelined strategist, anymore. I was Olivia Reed, the new Chief Marketing Officer of Innovate Dynamics. And my work was just beginning. My first day as Chief Marketing Officer was surreal. I walked into the corner office that had once been Richard's, the one with the panoramic view of the city. The desk was empty, cleared of all his personal effects, a blank slate waiting for a new occupant. It felt less like an office and more like a captured territory. The victory was sweet, but the taste of the battle still lingered. The news of Richard and Sophia's sudden departure had spread through the company like wildfire. The official company-wide email, carefully drafted by the board and sent under Eleanor Vance's name, was a masterpiece of corporate speak. It announced Richard's resignation to pursue other opportunities and my immediate promotion to CMO. It praised my visionary leadership and my instrumental role in developing the groundbreaking Project Chimera. My name was now officially and irrevocably cemented to my creation. The reactions from my colleagues were a study in human nature. The ones who had offered me silent sympathy now congratulated me with genuine warmth. The ones who had shifted their allegiance to Richard now approached me with a new, fawning respect, pretending they had been on my side all along. I accepted their congratulations with a professional grace, but I made mental notes. I knew who my real allies were. My first official act as CMO was to promote David Chen to Director of Data Science. I called him into my new office. He walked in, looking around with a wide, incredulous grin. "Director Chen, I presume?" I said, smiling. He laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "CMO Reed. It has a nice ring to it. How does it feel?" "Like justice," I said, and I meant it. "I couldn't have done it without you, David. You risked everything for me." "We did it," he corrected me. "And it was worth it. You cleaned out the rot." My next task was to address my team, the marketing department that had been left confused and rudderless. I called an all-hands meeting. I stood before them, not as their old boss, but as their new leader. I told them the truth, a sanitized version of it, focusing not on the betrayal, but on the future. I laid out my vision for the department, a vision built on transparency, collaboration, and a culture where credit was given where it was due. I reinstated Project Chimera as our top priority, and I made it clear that it was a team success, a victory for every single person who had worked on it. The relief and renewed energy in the room were palpable. The official launch of Project Chimera, under my leadership, was a phenomenal success. It exceeded every projection, boosted our stock price by 20% in a single quarter, and became a case study in business schools. I finally got to deliver my presentation, not just to the board, but to the entire world at the industry's largest tech conference. Standing on that stage, under the bright lights, sharing the work I was so proud of, was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. As for Richard and Sophia, their falls from grace were as swift as they were brutal. Richard Sterling was a pariah. The story of his downfall, though never officially confirmed, leaked to the industry press. Whispers of intellectual property theft and executive misconduct followed him everywhere. He was professionally radioactive, unable to secure another executive position. The last I heard, he was doing some low-level consulting for a no-name firm in another state, his empire reduced to a cubicle. Sophia's fate was less dramatic but equally devastating. Blacklisted from every major tech firm in the city, she ended up leaving the industry altogether. Her ambition had led her to hitch her wagon to a falling star, and she was crushed in the wreckage. I felt a fleeting sense of pity for her, for the waste of her potential, but it was quickly replaced by the memory of her complicity, of her voice on that recording, so eagerly helping to erase me. She had made her choice. My life settled into a new, exhilarating rhythm. The work was demanding, the pressure immense, but it was my own. I was no longer the genius behind the curtain, I was the one directing the show. I built a new leadership team based on talent and integrity. I fostered a culture of innovation and respect. Innovate Dynamics thrived, and for the first time, I felt like I truly belonged in the position I held. Months later, I was working late in my office, looking out at the glittering cityscape. My phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it. It contained a single image. It was a photograph, clearly taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. It was a picture of me, sitting at my desk, framed by the large window of my corner office. A tiny, insignificant figure against the backdrop of the city. A chill went down my spine. Then, a second text came through from the same number. It was just one word. Visionary 72. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. It was Richard. It was a message, a threat, a pathetic attempt to haunt me from the ruins of his career. He was reminding me that he knew how I had done it, that he was watching. For a moment, the old fear, the old feeling of being powerless, tried to surface. But it found no purchase. I was not the same woman he had tried to destroy. I looked at the picture of myself in the office he once occupied. I looked at the city I had helped conquer. I thought of the team I now led and the future I was building. With a steady hand, I blocked the number. I deleted the messages. He was a ghost, a relic of a battle I had already won. He was a whisper from a server room, a footnote in my story. I turned back to my work, the city lights reflecting in my eyes. He had called it a small meeting. He had no idea it would lead to my new, expansive horizon. And I was just getting started.